Hey there, I'm Arun Sivashankaran,
And I'm David Jansen.
and you're listening to the Revenue Funnel Optimization Podcast by FunnelEnvy.
This show's for B2B marketers, demand gen teams, and go-to-market folks who are over the hype and want the real stuff.
We're talking about what actually drives results across the funnel. Experiments, website optimization, buyer journeys that convert, not just vanity metrics.
It's tactical, it's honest, and yeah, sometimes it's messy.
That's how real revenue gets made. So let's get into it.
More data doesn't necessarily mean better decisions because they were paying people to take out the cobras, I think it was, in India. And they looked at the amount of cobras being killed and they're like, this is great. But people were breeding cobras to kill them. It's like finding that balance of, I think, data and actionability.
Welcome to another episode of the FunnelEnvy podcast. Today, I'm joined by someone who I've worked with several times over the years, and I'm excited to have here, Preston Zeller. Preston, say hi.
Yeah, hey, Arun. Hey, everyone listening in. Yeah, we've known each other like almost 10 years, I think.
I know, it's I'm getting older every day.
We're both more gray.
But more experience.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, Preston, we worked together. We'll get into a little bit of your background. Worked together back at DiscoverOrg, a cloud guru. Recently, I had an opportunity to catch up with you. Appreciate you, reaching out after many years of having spoken. And it turns out, even though you're coming at it from the marketing angle, and I come at some of the same problems as a developer, we've converged on several interesting things. So it's really cool to hear about some of what you've been up to. So yeah, excited to have you here. Maybe as a starting point, give us a little bit of background. Tell the audience a little bit about you, your experiences, and what you've done.
I kind of sit at this interesting intersection of being a very creative person when it comes to like arts and stuff like that, and then also very technical. So I guess I have my parents to thank for that in some ways. They're polar opposites, and I got a good mix of that. My background formally, education-wise, was actually in film. I was producing film. I worked in LA and all that stuff. But when I got out of it, this is around 2010, that was like kind of the heyday of a lot of the early marketing tools like HubSpot and whatnot were starting to come online. And because, that's not what I went to school for or whatever, I started working with these guys that were info marketers. And then I was also doing marketing for like e-com and kind of some B2B stuff there. But a lot of software tools that don't exist anymore started to come online that would like allow you to measure and automate different things. And I was just fascinated by that. Hey, could you set up a system and have that run in the background and help you get an edge over everyone else? And so that sort of getting an edge always appealed to me. And so anytime like some new technology has come out or I come across something, I'm like, oh, this could really make sense. I've tried to, do that. And so, in between, kind of the early days and landing at DiscoverOrg, which became ZoomInfo, all sorts of startup stuff, agency world, doing fundraising, $0 and also lots of dollars. And so eventually at the like early ZoomInfo world, that's where you and I met, of course. And that was a huge kind of eye-opening experience because they went from like $30 to $300 million while I was there in revenue, organic and inorganic. I was really getting to put a lot of my skills to use and ended there as a chief of staff for the CMO after that, kind of merger. And really fell in love with this idea of like productizing marketing. But I went on from there eventually to how do you do CDP stuff and piping data around to these different platforms and tracking events. And then my last stint was as a chief growth officer for a real estate data company. So I've kind of had this weird crossover of like data companies and how do you work with that on a massive level. But then also how do you continue to like have a technical marketing skill set and foster that within a company. I love the Cobra effect analogy that you shared many years ago. More data doesn't necessarily mean better decisions because they were paying people to take out the cobras, I think it was, in India. And they looked at the amount of cobras being killed and they're like, this is great. But people were breeding cobras to kill them. So anyways,
I didn't know that you came out of like the film industry and kind of jumped from that into marketing. And I think There's something there in that you have a natural curiosity, and I think this is true of a lot of like effective marketers, developers, engineers, and especially ones that can evolve through transitional periods like we have now, where you don't know HubSpot, but I'm going to go figure out and learn it, right? And I'm going to take what I do know and get in the weeds and be curious about doing stuff. And I think that's a huge asset in terms of your ability to sort of ride the waves of disruption as they come.
Yeah, well, it's funny the filmmaking thing. The thing I really loved about film school in general, and then the filmmaking process was storytelling, which is such an underrated skill.
Yeah.
I love to do this with my kids, where they'll read a book or we'll watch a movie, and we'll try to pull out, hey, how did this person change over the course of the story, or who is the protagonist, antagonist, that kind of stuff. But I think this. I released a documentary in 2022 that was inspired by my own experience in grief and losing my brother and stuff. And I knew from partially research, partially just firsthand experience that a very good story, people will suffer through mediocre visuals.
Mm-hmm.
Audio they won't, but mediocre visuals, because it's captivating. You see this in documentaries a lot, where it's a lot of like found footage. There's just kind of like janky, filmed on an old camera. But the storytelling thing, back to like data, and what is the through thread of all these things? You can get all the data you want, build all the tools you want, all that. But if you can't communicate effectively and succinctly, what is the arc of this thing? What's the problem? Where are we at here? What's this thing solving? Those kind of, I think, oddly enough, filmmaking skill sets have been helpful in some of the thought process throughout, marketing and these tools.
Yeah, it's interesting you touch on the storytelling aspect, because like that was one of my lessons learned from some of the personalization and predictive stuff that we did when we were at DiscoverOrg. I think you called it the bleeding edge earlier. I still have scars from the bleeding edge because
Yeah.
it's kind of what I'd call these days like old AI, right? So for anyone listening, FunnelEnvy, we built a platform that effectively used the data from in the case of DiscoverOrg, Marketo, and Salesforce and the website to predict the experience that visitor would want. It could do it on a one-to-one basis, and other folks have gone down this road as well, like the folks at Intellimise that were bought by Webflow, Adobe Target, other platforms as well. We were doing it pretty early, and it's interesting because while effective in many cases, and I think at DiscoverOrg, we had some pretty good like proof points and use cases. What I really learned about that is that old AI, because it was supervised learning and it was machine learning, but it wasn't LLMs and the stuff that we're using now. It was very opaque. Data scientists would call this the interpretability problem. The way I think about it is, I would point at results and say, great, we've got a 50%, 60%, 100% lift with this experiment. And marketers would be like, why? Like, I can't take that. I mean, there's got to be a story behind this. There's got to be something that I can take to that weekly meeting with the CMO and turn data into a narrative that we can then use to advance other aspects of go-to-market and marketing. And that's really what I think we were missing, and why we had a lot of challenges with it as we tried to sort of grow that offering.
Any good leader is saying, what are we doing right? Let's do more of that. And then if you can't point to why it's right, you're not able to break it down and improve upon it. You're just kind of a consumer of it. And that's something I challenge myself on, is like, I don't want to just be a consumer of any of these technologies. I want to understand, at least to the degree I can, how it's working.
I had this shower thought, and I was kind of thinking about all of the change that's happening now with LLMs, and I would never have anticipated, and a lot of this, current LLM technology came out of the transformer model that was innovation at Google, actually, which they sat on until it exploded initially with like OpenAI and those people. But really, it's that ability to take natural language, the way we communicate, the way we're communicating now, turn it into structured outputs, and do the reverse, right? Look at structured data and turn it into natural language. And that fundamental kind of innovation has unlocked so many use cases. And why is that? And I think it's because it makes what the computer is doing more relatable to humans and vice versa. And from that, you get storytelling, you get the ability to get insights out of data. You open up the possibility for people who previously couldn't or were limited in their interactions with machines to be able to do that. You mentioned mentioned, N8N and some of the low code stuff. Let's start there before we get to the new agents and LLM. So I know you've done a lot of work in terms of automation and low code before we got there. Like,
Mhm.
tell us about that. What got you into that, and what sort of things have you done with it?
Yeah, I mean, I started joining these like different groups when, of course, there's always quote unquote gurus who start popping up. I mean,
Mhm.
X is littered with that. N8N in particular, I'd use Zapier, of course, like most of us. I saw that as a way to be able to visualize and then also very flexibly solve different kind of problems. So there's a few things that I had at the time in my like CGO role, which was like, hey, we never had a dedicated social person. It was a bit ad hoc on certain roles. So I was like, okay, well, how can we automate social to some degree? That was pulling a combination of like things going on in Sheets, having different queries to OpenAI, so much tinkering with that to get it right. And it worked to some degree. Two of the most successful ones there were we had an invoicing challenge where it was taking like 3 people, and this was in like a B2B context, 3 people to do the invoicing for our
Mhm.
B2B clients. And we didn't have like a Maxio or something. And it was a pain that everyone griped about in that process. Like, this is very inefficient. So was kind of able to break down the essence of what that problem was. And between Stripe and Salesforce, basically, and a lot of testing, we were able to make that all work. And then the last one that really comes to mind was because I was at a real estate data company. I knew that there were kind of the more forward-thinking real estate investors, that was a lot of our more like prosumer clientele. They would go use these kinds of tools. They're always looking for efficiency hacks and all that kind of stuff. So I created a few different N8N templates and put them out there that were like would score leads, source leads, those kinds of things, put them back in your CRM or into spreadsheet. The Slack notification thing was pretty cool, to be able to update a bunch of people at one time. So put those out there, and those actually blew up pretty quickly in terms of, people using them. And even as I was using that,
Mhm.
I was looking at other solutions because I'm like, this is you called it out right the other day. It's very deterministic. It's not really like agentic AI. People kept
Yeah.
calling it agentic AI. I'm like, this is a workflow that's tapping into LLMs. Like, that's it.
Yeah. It's a similar perspective that I came to. We still have a lot of N8N workflows running. It's
Mhm.
funny, we have invoicing one too
Yeah.
that runs through N8N, like hits BigQuery and QuickBooks and whatever, and formats them and pulls the data in. So it's quite useful. So that takes us to like what you're doing with Claude Code, other
Mhm.
solutions. Like, tell me a little bit more about that. Like, what's the latest and greatest?
Prior to that, I'll say I was along with N8N. I started working with Replit a lot, and I tried out all the other ones too, similar to Replit. But where N8N, I think, has this very like utility workflow aspect to it. What Replit and similar ones have been able to do is then allow your ideas to come to life in a more vivid way, right?
Yep.
You're going to create a tool or whatever. What Claude Code is doing is combining all that to me. With Replit, I'll say like it took, say, what you could do in N8N, let's say social monitoring, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
I always wanted to have needed that as a CGO. I'm like, I need to see where we're getting talked about, what conversations we need to be in. But getting Meltwater or something like that their mentioning tools was just off the table. It was too expensive. So in Replit, I created a social monitoring tool that went into Quora, Reddit, YouTube, Substack, and I think it was every 4 or 6 hours. It had all the different keywords that I was looking for, and you could specify subreddits that you wanted. So if I wanted like real estate data, and you could use quotes, so it was exact phrase, but basically it would give you a feed of all that, and then it was just pulling it into Slack. So it
Yeah.
wasn't too complicated, but that was kind of a game changer because I'm like, oh man, there's a lot of places to be involved in these conversations. Created an in-house CPQ because that was
Mhm.
another thing we looked at getting. So cost, price, quote, all that to be said, and I want to get your response to that, but all that to be said, I think Replit has done a great job in helping people with the ideas create either internal or external applications that are a bit more robust than, say, like the utility aspect of N8N.
I love it. What I really like is I've been writing code forever. And it's funny now because I was reading this article the other day where, someone else who had been writing code for their entire life and career, like all of a sudden that's gone. That's not a thing anymore, right? And so on one hand, it's weird, right? That
Yeah.
that's not a thing anymore. On the other hand, I do like having these conversations. I see examples of this all the time where like people, for me, it's often like marketers that I talk to who aren't necessarily technical, who aren't building stuff, but they're curious, right? And one of my friends who's a marketer, like he's a college football fan, so he built this thing that, again, playing around with like Replit or Claude or whatever, right? I love it. I mean, it's the democratization of this stuff, and it's really shrunk the distance between, for the marketers or the growth people, you own those KPIs, but you've historically had to go through like a data person, an analysis person, an engineer, an ops person to like get to the outcome. It collapses all of those steps and lets you get to that outcome faster. So I think it's amazing and fascinating. It's hard to wrap your head around sometimes, like how quickly that's moving. But I mean, putting more technology is always best used when it puts more capability in the hands of the people who have ownership. And I think if done right, that's exactly what you're describing with Replit, Claude, all of these tools.
I think if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I'm in a big company and we're kind of limited on what we can do there, it's like you have to go invest some of your money into small subscriptions and mess around. Like I was talking to a friend of mine at a huge public legacy company the other day, and he happens to head up sales, and he was telling me sort of the guardrails they have, right? Of they've contracted very bespoke versions of Copilot and versions of these other things. And so he has to log into this completely separate portal to be able to do some guardrail prompting. And I'm like, that's fine probably for your use case. They're not just going to let you open-ended put this customer data into Claude, which makes sense. But also I'm like, what are you doing outside of that? Okay, Claude Code. So let's go there and what that's doing, because skills came about not that long ago. Claude Code, it's existed kind of in tandem with like the desktop just chat version. And they have different use cases. And as I've gotten into the skills aspect, if you combine skills with MCP with Claude Code, it's insane what you can do now. And then if you have, just go get a basic understanding, if you don't already, of how APIs work and just the ability to read API documentation, which all the LLMs kind of screw up to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hit and miss, at least. You can go kind of dream up just about anything.
This reminds me a lot of the 90s and the sort of web revolution, where initially in the large companies you had like intranets and you couldn't actually even get out to the external web. And so all of the innovation happened outside of that. And finally they figured it out. And that's going to happen at some point because this is just enabling so much capability in smaller organizations to move so fast that larger companies are going to have to figure it out.
I mean, one of the things Claude Code's been so interesting for is, again, in contrast to like say N8N, is the ability to, like, if you have a process, can Claude Code help you just create that process with the APIs, but then also give you like a backend to go and monitor that. And you say, hey, give me status updates on all the way. But the more exciting thing about this to me is, let's take the billing example. Well, let's say you have a billing workflow, but then you also have like multiple customer support workflows, and then you have all these other things that are like your operational nucleus for your company, and it's requiring different layers of customization. You could probably pull in like status updates, I'm sure, from like a N8N API call. But if you have the tool, you own those tools, there's a sense of like, I think, satisfaction there where it's accessible and also not excessive Whereas before, if you wanted to do some of these things, maybe you're buying multiple tools, you're locked into these long-term contracts, and it's not like evolving with you. Most people, when they're quote unquote, they're using quote unquote AI, it's like very simple form of ChatGPT, or they're using it simply, I should say. And then Gen Z and then Gen Alpha, that's going to be the generation that I think really in probably 15 years, they're growing up with this stuff being native